Hi guys, Jamie here from JB Motion. Today we're going to be creating the video that you're looking at right now. It's pretty easy to set up. It consists of a torus that has a bunch of cubes cloned around its surface, and then we're going to be using fields. We're going to be using a spherical field that's going to be animated around the object that's going to push the cubes up and in different directions, and also the color is going to change. So let's get started on this. Here we go. So to start off, we're going to create a torus, and we are going to create a cube. So the cube is what we're going to be cloning along the surface of the torus. So we're going to set the size here to be 9 by 9 by 9. And our torus, we can set the pipe radius to be about 70 centimeters. So we need to create a cloner for our cube, but before we do that, let's just turn on fillet, and we can set the fillet radius to be 0.5 and reduce the fillet subdivisions to 3. So now we can create our cloner and add the cube as a child of it. Now we want to clone our cubes along each of these vertices, so each of the points here on our torus. So to do that, select your cloner object, go into the object tab, set the mode to object, and then drag your torus down to the object field. And then we need to set the distribution to vertex. Now we're getting one cube for every point on our torus. So we can control the amount of clones we're getting by simply increasing the pipe segments and the ring segments on our torus. So we can do that right now. Let's just bring this up to about a number like 88 or whatever number brings our cubes close together without actually letting them intersect. So I'm just going to go for 90 on the ring segments, and then for the pipe segments, bringing that right up to about 50. Okay, so now we want to be able to affect the movement and the scale of our cubes. So to do that, select your cloner, go to MoGraph, and go down and grab a plane effector. And the reason I'm selecting my cloner before I do that is so that when I do select plane effector, it will be added in to my effectors tab in my cloner automatically. Otherwise you'd have to drag it in manually. So make sure you always do that whenever you're creating an effector for a cloner. So go into your plane effector now, and in the parameters tab, let's set the position on the Y to 0, and let's bring the position on the Z to about 40 centimeters. And next we're going to create a random effector. So click on your cloner, go to MoGraph, effector, and random. Okay, so let's go back to our plane effector and go into the fall off tab, and we're going to add in a spherical field. And if I just turn off my random effector for the time being, and I grab my spherical field, make sure object model mode is selected so that you can see it. And if I just move this over here, you'll see that my clones are only going to be affected wherever my spherical field is touching them. So bring your spherical field over so you can see the effect it's having over to your clones, and then turn on your random effector. And now you can see that the random effector is actually affecting all of the clones. So we just wanted to affect the clones that are inside this spherical field. So go into your random effector object, make sure the fall off tab is selected, and then just drag the spherical field down into the panel here. So now we're only getting randomness wherever the spherical field is touching the clones. So go into your random effector and let's mess around with these parameters. Let's set the Y here to 0, set the X to 60, and the Z to, we'll go -20 for now. Select scale, and let's deselect scale for the time being. We'll go into our plane effector and we'll affect the scale from our plane effector. So we want to scale it up along the Z axis. So let's drag that right up to a value of about 9. And now if we go back into our random effector, we can then mess around with our X and Z positions to get more randomness. So we don't want to go too far so that you're going to be able to see our cubes leaving our torus. So make sure that our cubes aren't leaving our torus, or at least that you're not able to see the bottoms of them. So about here is good for me. It's set about 122 centimeters. And now I'm going to grab my spherical field and I'm going to scale it up so that it's a bit bigger. And I want to reduce the inner offset. So click on your spherical field, go to remapping tab, and I'm just going to reduce the inner offset there. So basically it's going to create a larger gradual change. You can see that I'm actually increasing and decreasing this smaller circle here, and that's going to increase the amount of time it takes for the value to go from 0 to 1. Okay, so now we got our spherical field set up, and we can see the bottom of this one here, but I'm sure that if I increase the amount of clones, that won't be a problem. So let's just test out what we've got so far. Let's grab our spherical field and go into our click on move tool. Now if we just drag this around, you're able to see the effect that's having on our clones. So what I want to do is go into my random effector and bring this value down here on the Z, because right now it's pushing our clones a bit too far. I'm going to bring that down to about 40 centimeters. And I'm going to increase the scale in my plane effector to about 10. Okay. So the next thing I want to do is create a path for our spherical field to follow. So we're going to create a path using the pen tool, and then we're going to use the align to spline tool to animate our spherical field along that spline. So let's hop into our top view and grab your pen tool, and let's just create a path that's going to kind of travel in and out of our torus. So you can be pretty random with this. I'm just kind of going in and out because I like the effect that that has when the spherical field leaves the torus, and when it re-enters it looks pretty cool. So that's kind of why I'm choosing to go in and out. Now you can choose to go around. You could even just create a circle spline or a helix to use that as your spline for animating. It's completely up to you now for the spline part of this. Okay, so I'm going to hit escape to, well, I want to make sure that my last spline isn't too close to my torus. And then I'm going to hit escape. And when I said my last spline, I meant to say my last point on my spline. I don't want it too close to my torus, so when it animates out, that our spherical field is going to be far enough away from our torus that no more of the cubes are going to be inside of it, so that we're going to be able to get a loop in our animation. So now if we jump back into our perspective view, we have our spline. We need to animate our spherical field along it. So we're going to use an align to spline tag. So right click on your spherical field and go to Cinema 4D tags, align to spline. Now we can drag the spline that we just created down to the spline path field. And now if we select our spherical field and make sure that model mode is selected so that we'll be able to see it, what we can do now is go into our align to spline tag, and we can move the position from 0 to 100%, and that's going to animate along it. So let's set it to 0 and add a keyframe. Let's go ahead, let's first of all increase our frame range to about 400 frames. And then if we go to our last frame, we can set the position to 100% and then add another keyframe. And what we want to do is set the interpolation between keyframes to linear. So hit Shift F3 on your keyboard to bring up your timeline. And your align to spline animation is already going to be selected. Just hit L on your keyboard to set the interpolation to linear there. There's going to be no easing in or easing out, so it's going to be faster. So that's going to come in, come back out, kind of slow down there, and as it goes around. And it goes back again. So right there, I don't want it to leave the torus. So I'm going to go back into my top view, select my spline, go into point mode, and I'm going to grab, using my rectangle selection tool, I'm going to grab these 2 points. Just going to bring them in closer to my torus. Back into perspective view, and now let's see what that looks like now. So it doesn't leave the torus fully. The clones aren't. The spherical field is still affecting some of the clones. Then it goes around there again, and then it goes out. It exits the torus at that point. Now, speed-wise, we're not going to get a valid idea of the speed of this animation just by playing it like this, because it's not rendering at it's not playing back in real time. So to make it play back in real time, we need to turn off all frames, so that it's not going to try and play each and every frame, and then we can get an exact idea of the timing of our animation. So let's play that again, see if that's going too fast or too slow. So I might just slow it down just a little bit. Maybe I'll go, I'll go 500 frames. And I'll hit Shift F3 on my keyboard and then just drag these out to around the 500 mark. So you can zoom in on your timeline in the exact same way you'd zoom in and out of your viewport. You can pan in the exact same way you would so in your viewport. So now if we watch that again, it's slowed down a bit but not too much, and I'm happy enough with that. Okay, so next I want to kind of mix up the colors a bit. So I want our cubes to have one color as they're outside of the spherical field, and then another color when they're inside of it, or when they're rising up. So if we go into my plane effector, go to the fall off tab, and what we can do is add in a solid filter. So we'll click on this little arrow here and then you can find it there. Let's bring it to the bottom layer, make it the bottom layer there, underneath our spherical field, and set our spherical field to add. And we don't want our solid to affect any parameters, we just want it to be affecting color. So now we can pick a color for our solid field. I'm going to go for something like teal, and for the spherical field I can go into my color remap tab and I can grab a bluish color, and let's just reduce the opacity of our solid down to about 60%, so we're actually seeing that blue a bit more showing up in our spherical field. So my values for my, let's actually mix it up a bit more. I'm going to go darker blue for my solid, and for my spherical field I'm going to go for a kind of a pinkish color like that. So we can reduce the opacity of our solid so that our pink will show up a little bit more in our clones there. Okay, so next I want to increase the amount of clones that I'm getting so that we're getting less gaps here. So what we need to do is go into our Torus object and we can bring up the ring segments right up to about, I'm going for 125. Pipe segments I'm going to bring up to about 55. So now if we play this, we're going to get a lot more detail and a lot more basically goings on, I suppose you could say, in our animation. So that's looking pretty good. If we do a quick render preview there on that. Okay, so now we need to set up our lights, get in some shadows, and we're going to be almost done then. So let's create a light. I'm going to bring it over here to my right, and I'm going to bring it down along the Z. And I'm going to go up along the Y as well. And I want to turn on shadows for this light. So go into your shadow tab and let's set this to area. Let's rename this to key. And I want to duplicate this light. Just drag it over, maybe a little bit further away. And I'm going to call this fill. And this is going to have no shadow. It's going to have an intensity of 60%, so you can reduce the intensity in the general tab there. And I'm going to duplicate it again. It's going to jump into my top view. I'm going to duplicate this fill, just drag it over. I'm holding down control before I drag so I can duplicate it. I'm going to drag it right back here. And maybe, yeah, I'm going to leave it there, maybe bring it down a little on the Y. And so for this light, I'm calling it rim, and on the Y coordinates it's set to 196 centimeters. Now don't be too worried about getting the light positions exact, because I'm going to be moving them around again in a minute. I'm just going to set them up roughly for now to see if I get something that I like, and if I don't, I'm going to move them again. So it's kind of moving these lights around until you see something you like, and going with it from there. So I'm just going to put those into a null and call the null lighting. Now I want to find a nice position for the camera here, so maybe about here. I'm not going to create one just yet, and I want to turn on ambient occlusion. So to do that, go into your render settings and you can go to effect and just turn on ambient occlusion. If you don't know what ambient occlusion is, it's just going to add in some contact shadows between each of your objects. So what I'll do is actually turn it off, and I'll do a render to picture viewer. And you can see we got our shadows from our lights, but we don't have any contact shadows. So if I go back in and turn that on, and now you'll be able to see the difference. That's the before, that's the after. So you can see that ambient occlusion really does make it look a lot nicer. Okay, so what I want to do now is mess around with our animation a bit. So first of all, I want to go into my Random Effector, go into the Effector tab, and I'm going to actually go into the Parameter tab. No, what I want to do is go into my Plane Effector, Spherical Field. Okay, got there, third time lucky. And I want to set a min here. So you can see that right now all of the cubes that are being cloned along the torus are very in order, you could say. Lack of grammar right now, but anyway, they're too perfect. So I want to kind of make them look a bit more organic. So let's bring this min up here. So that means that we're going to have the spherical effector is going to cause most of the changes of positioning and scale, but we're going to have a minimum amount set, so that if we set it to 5%, that means that 5% of the spherical field's power is going to be applied across the board. So maybe even bring it down to 2.5. So now if we render to picture viewer on that, you're going to see it's looking a lot more natural and organic than this did anyway. I might reduce the amount of segments on my torus because we're getting a lot of obvious intersections there. So I'm going to go into my torus object and reduce the pipe segments down. And I'm going to increase the ring segments. And let's see what that looks like. We're going to get more intersections along the ring segments, but I'm not as bothered about that. I think that looks a lot better. Yeah, I'm kind of liking that a bit more for whatever reason. And one last thing we're going to want to do for our animation to make it even more organic looking is add a delay modifier. So to do that, go into your spherical field, or sorry, go into your plane effector and click on the fall off tab and just go to this little arrow here and you'll be able to find the delay modifier. Make sure you set the blending mode to add, and now you're going to get a much more organic result. So you may have seen the delay effector in action before R20. It works just the same in that it kind of smoothens everything out. I'm actually going to set this to spring so that they kind of get a ripple effect as the spherical field leaves them, the cloners that is. Let's just have a look at that, what that looks like. So you can kind of see it's leaving behind this cool ripple effect as it travels along, and it just looks way cooler. I want to see if I can get a better positioning of my lighting. First of all, let's zoom in a bit on this. Let's just scrub along to make sure that we're not losing anything out of our shot. So that's pretty good. Let's center this torus object a bit more. And I'm going to grab my lighting null here, which contains all of my lights. And if I just jump into my top view so you can see what I'm doing, I'm just going to use my rotate tool and just kind of rotate these around. I better jump into my perspective view actually so you can see what's going on. So you can see the change it's having in the viewport there. So I want to get a bit more interesting lighting. So I'm going to try this. See if that looks any better. So it's pretty similar. Actually, I think it's exactly the same. Let's get our spherical field rocking again before we do this. Let's put it over here for the time being. And let's grab our lighting and let's just rotate it again a bit more. Let's try this. So again, I'm just messing around with my lighting, trying to get a more interesting shot. So I might reduce the intensity on one of my lights. Create a camera first so I know where I'm looking. Jump into my top view so you can see my camera is looking in this direction. And we got the key here. So let's bring the key back to the front. Let's grab the fill. And let's grab actually the rim and move it further away. And maybe even reduce the intensity down to about 20%. Let's have a look at what we got now. So I'm liking that now straight away. Compared to this anyway, it's just kind of very flat looking. So just moving your lights around can make a huge difference to your final render. You can see that we're getting some jaggedness here. It's caused by our intersections. So what you could do is reduce your segments on your ring to reduce the amount of clones, or you can turn on anti-aliasing. Go into your render settings. Now this will increase your render time. So if you don't want to do that, just decrease the amount of segments in your torus so that you're getting less intersections, or zero intersections would be better again. I'm going to set my anti-alias in here to best, and I'll try 2x2. See if that's going to be enough. And you can see that there's still some black lines, but they're not as jagged. I could go 4x4, but I'm not going to bother. That's good enough for me. And I want to set my torus material to be black in the luminance channel. So I'm going to create a new material, open it up, and I'm going to turn off the color and the reflectance, turn on luminance, and make it black. And the reason I'm doing that is so that I'm not going to see my torus, and also I'm not going to see any of my clones that are going to intersect my torus, basically. So if I do another render to picture viewer there, so as our torus is set to black on the luminance channel, it's just basically gonna, wherever you're seeing the torus, there's going to be no shadows cast on it. It's not going to be affected by ambient occlusion. It's just going to blend in with this black alpha here. So then we'll be able to render it out, bring it into After Effects, and just put a background there, but you're not going to see the background through these gaps because the torus is going to be there. You're just not going to see it. So that's why I'm doing that. And that is it for this tutorial, guys. So what you need to do is just set up your render settings. Make sure you do a save as, and go into your render settings, set the output here. I'm just going to do 1280 by 720. Feel free to bring that up to 1920 by 1080 if you want to go higher on the resolution. Current frame, I'm going to set this to all frames, so we're going to have 500 of those. And we're going to save this as a PNG sequence. I'm going to go for, what did I call this again? Fields, Torus, or Fields on a Torus. There we go. And sequence, and I'm calling it Fields on a Torus. Okay, turn on the alpha channel, so you're going to be able to bring it into After Effects and put in a cool background or whatever you want behind it if you want to. And that is it. Do another save, Control S, and then let's bring up the render queue and go to add to render queue. And there we have it. Okay guys, so I hope you enjoyed the tutorial, hope you learned a lot. If you did, please click the like button, it helps me out a lot, and I'll see you in the next video.